Hi, my name is Triya. I'm a junior doctor working in London and I've recently graduated from Oxford University. Today I'm going to talk about some myths from Oxford University and Oxford Medical School and whether they're true or not. Let's get into the video. So the first myth about Oxford is that it's impossible to get in. When I was applying for medical school, a lot of people told me that it was impossible to get into Oxford or Cambridge, and they also said that it was equally impossible to get into medical school. So choosing Oxbridge and medical school together was just too hard and you had to choose either Oxbridge or medicine. Now it is true that Oxford Medical School has a low acceptance rate. At the time when I was applying, the acceptance rate was about 10%, so it is true that it is hard to get in, but it's not impossible. I think the thing about applying to Oxford is that if you want it and you don't apply to it because you don't think you're good enough or you don't think you're going to get in, you'll definitely end up regretting it. Everyone who I've spoken to who had even a small inkling that they wanted to go to Oxford or Cambridge and then were somehow dissuaded, either by themselves or their family or even teachers, ended up regretting not applying. At least if you apply and you don't get in, you can say that you tried. My advice is that if you want to apply for Oxford or Cambridge, you should just do it. Although yes, there are a lot of hoops that you have to jump through, especially when applying to medical school. You have to do things like the BMAT, personal statement, work experience, volunteering, but ultimately it is just selecting a box on a UCAS form. A lot of people think that only geniuses get into Oxford, and I can tell you that that's not true. Although there are some people who can get away with working very little and still get very good grades, that is not the majority, and definitely not who I was at university. I think most people are just normal, hard-working students. So the next myth I want to talk about is that Oxford is really old-fashioned. When I first moved into university, as I was taking my suitcases out of the car, the first student I met was a boy who was wearing a tailcoat and a top hat. And I immediately thought, is this the type of person that I'm going to be with the entire 6 years that I'm here? But actually, as I went on, I found that that was the minority. So there are aspects of that are true. Oxford has a lot of traditions, which can seem quite strange to people who didn't go to Oxford. For example, there's a strict academic dress code for exams. Now this is called sub-fusk. So for me, I had to wear a white shirt, a black skirt, a gown and a black ribbon for exams. There's also a tradition called trashing, which happens at the end of your last exam of the year. Generally, your friends will come and meet you outside the exam building and will spray you in shaving cream, confetti, glitter, as a sort of celebration, and that usually ends in people jumping in the river. So from the outside, I can understand how this does seem quite strange, but it is one of those unique experiences that everyone takes part in. So yes, Oxford is very traditional. That being said, I think that the university has tried to modernise itself a little bit. I think this does come very, very slowly. For example, discussing issues with equality and diversity in the curriculum. So the next myth I want to talk about is that it's not diverse. My fear when I was applying to university is that only posh, rich, white students would get in. Now I think in comparison to London universities, Oxford does definitely lack in diversity when it comes to the student body and also the faculty. However, in terms of students, there are definitely people from diverse backgrounds here, and I think you will find your people. There are also lots of international students, and I found that when I came to Oxford, I ended up having friends from all parts of the world. I will say, however, that I do think the teaching staff lacks diversity. So for example, when I was in the first 3 years of medical school, known as preclinical medicine, we had lectures every day, and in those 3 years, I could count the number of non-white lecturers I had in one hand. When it came to the last 3 years of medical school, which was clinical medicine, taught mostly in the hospitals, I think there was a bit more diversity. However, it was still lacking, and one of the reasons why I chose to practice medicine in London instead of staying in Oxford after my degree. So the next myth is that Oxford isn't fun at all. So I can see why people think that this is the case, because all you ever hear about Oxford is how hard it is and how much you have to work. But I think the thing about Oxford is balancing your work with other things. And most people who come here are involved with other things. So there's lots of extracurricular activities, basically everything you can think of, from sports to dancing to music. And in terms of other fun stuff, Oxford is a relatively large city which has a lot of bars and nightclubs, so there is always something on every night if that's what you're interested in. Another good thing about Oxford is that every college has its own bar with subsidised drinks. But don't worry, even if you don't drink alcohol, there are fun things to do. If you like partying, another thing that is good about Oxford is that there are always big parties going on. Some of these are for charity and some of these are commemoration balls. Basically, they are just all-night parties with free drinks and free food. And they are some of the highlights of the year. So I wouldn't worry, there is always something fun to do in Oxford. So another myth I want to talk about is that Oxford don't care about you as a person. Now, when you go to admissions talks in high school, you'll often hear that Oxford don't care about your extracurricular activities, that they won't read your personal statement, and that they don't care about you as a person. Now, I think that that's not necessarily the whole story. Definitely when you're applying, they care more about how you think, and therefore your academics are really important. But once you get in, they do look after you. So I think when people have major and minor problems, there's always someone to talk to. So this could be your academic tutors and people directly involved in your course, but there are also other people in your college who are separated from your degree who you can talk to. The university also has a free counselling service, which is quite useful. So there are people to talk to. That being said, there is a very high-pressured academic environment in Oxford, which does make it difficult at times. A lot of people I know have struggled with mental health issues and also anxiety around exams and the major workload. Now, because I haven't been to any other university, I can't really tell you if this is worse or not at Oxford, but I do think it's something that you should consider. So the next myth I want to talk about is something that relates to Oxford Medical School. So a lot of people say that Oxford Medical School isn't clinical enough and won't help you to be a good doctor. Now, people always bring this up to me and I have a problem with it, because firstly, it's not true, and secondly, I don't think that you become a good doctor by spending all your time entirely in the hospital. I do think you need to learn the knowledge first, whether that be through lectures or reading textbooks, and that reflects the way the Oxford curriculum is structured. So for the first 3 years, you do mainly a science degree, and then the next 3 years you move on to the clinical aspect. Now, that being said, you still do see patients in the first 2 years. You have something called a patient-doctor course, where you meet with a GP tutor and you learn how to talk to patients, how to take a history, and things like that. So it's not like there's no exposure to patients, but it is limited, and for a good reason. Medical school is all about finding a balance between studying and clinical exposure. I think for me personally, I really like the way that Oxford did it. A lot of people think that you have to be very rich to get into Oxford. Oxford has a lot of bursaries and hardship funds that make it financially viable. Another thing that's good about the collegiate system, and especially good if you go to one of the richer colleges, is that they subsidise the food and the rent. So it's relatively cheap to live as a student, and the fact that the living is subsidised makes it easier overall. So that's the end of the video. Thank you for watching. I hope that was useful. If you have any questions, let me know.